Good morning. I pulled this off the shelf of my library, my office. I haven't opened this in over 40 years. This is my 9th grade yearbook. Okay, any Green Wave alumni in here? All right. So I graduated from Summerville High School in '83. So this was the '80 edition. I had moved here in '79. My family moved here, and I've already told you the story of how I met Anita. That was about a month after being here. Well, it was about the same time, and the reason I brought this is because I looked up my algebra teacher. I'll tell you, I've never failed at anything in school. I'd never gotten an F in any class for a whole class. I'd never even failed at halfway point, but I failed the first 9 weeks of Algebra 1. F into the first 9 weeks. That had never happened. D's weren't. I wasn't an A student by any stretch. I had too much fun in class to do that. But I was a pretty solid B student, A, B, and a few C's, so going up to this point. So this was new territory for me, and I was terrified for my parents to see that 9 week, because we got grades every 9 weeks, or at least they found out. I don't know how it worked out. So eventually I pushed through, and I didn't drop the class, which is something I typically did in college when I got bad grades. But I pushed through. My parents supported me. I worked hard, and I figured, and they didn't have word problems the rest of the year. So I was good, because word problems was my problem. I just couldn't do them at the time. So I went into engineering. So makes no sense. But I failed, and then I got through, okay? So as I was flipping through this, this dropped out. This was my first 9 weeks class schedule. So this is before I've ever been to the class. And there's some handwritten notes here from my guidance counselor. And they switched my Algebra 1 teacher from I think, Ms. Robbins to Mr. Thaler. I've got the yearbook here to prove it, and he even signed my yearbook. So sometimes we fail. What do we do when we fail spiritually? Where do we go when we fail God? We feel like we've let God down. I can still remember the moment when one of my daughters, I got upset with her, and this was my second oldest, so, and I just let her have it. And I didn't usually do that, but I let her have it. I yelled at her. And she had a very tender spirit, so the tears were flowing. And I felt bad, and she left, and God convicted me of that. And so I went back to her, and at some point, not that much later, I went back to her, and I apologized to her. And by then, she was happy and running around and playing, and she'd totally forgotten about it. And she's like, "It's okay, Daddy." And then I cried. Sometimes, though, when we do stuff like that, we feel like we fail, because we do. Where do you go when you fail God? And the answer, look, if you got to go, I'm going to give you an easy out, okay? The answer is you go back to where you were last with Him. Really, sounds pretty simple, doesn't it? It is simple. It's not easy. So we talk a lot about, I use my arm signals to say, this is the side where you go down the broad road that leads to destruction. This is the narrow way that leads to life. We follow Jesus down it. I say that over and over. So we're walking down the narrow road with God, with Jesus, and we get off the path, and we end up in the ditch. Country roads, they have ditches on the sides. And you don't want to end up in the ditch. And when you get in the ditch, it's hard to get out. So I was in high school. I was out with my buddy so I didn't go out a lot on Friday nights. I didn't do that. But my buddy, who was a year younger than me, my best friend, he had a Volkswagen bus. It was orange with the white top and the orange, the rest of it, and it was loud and proud. And so he was like, "Hey, let's go do this, whatever." And I'm like, "Okay, well, you're driving, so let's go." Well, long story short, we ended up in a ditch. He ditched the van, which was like so stressing me out, and it wasn't even my problem. And so we had to get help to get out of the ditch. We couldn't push it out. So he's the one who has to answer to his family. But my point is, we get into the ditch, and we need help. We need to get out of the ditch. How do we get out of the ditch? And that's really what this story from Abram is going to tell us. It's when we fail, when we find ourselves in the ditch, what do we do? Where do we go when we fail God? And the answer is we go back to the place we were last with him. And so how do we do that? How do we get there? Abraham's going to show us that. Abram is going to show us that. Okay, so we're in chapter 12. We're going to start in verse 10. And last week we saw that Abram was like sky high. Talk about a victory with God, triumph with the Lord. This is a guy who's getting the blessing of blessing. He is the foundation of the faith for at least two major world religions right now, right? Judaism and Christianity. And of course, Judaism shouldn't be, but because they don't believe Jesus is their Messiah, they're still waiting. Okay, well, he'll come back and they'll get it then. Sooner, better late than never, I'm hoping. But he says, I'm going to make you into a great nation. I'm reading verses 2 and 3. I'm going to bless you, Abram. I'm going to make your name great. You're going to be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you, and all the peoples of the world will be blessed through you. And then a little bit later, he tells him, in this land called Canaan, you're going to get it all. Your descendants are going to own this place. And this is all Abram did. He believed. He believed God. And because of that, God holds Abram up as an example. It's like a trophy of grace. He holds him up as an example of all God calls you and I to do. Just trust me. So we're talking about triumph, spiritual triumph here. Now here's the first truth that you need to think about, and you're going to see it play out right here. Testing often follows triumph. You can write that down. Testing usually follows triumph. And God allows testing to happen, and sometimes he literally causes it to happen. This is why we cling to the verse in James 1, 2 through 4, where it says, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. Why? Because the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work. Why? So that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. How would you like to be mature and complete mentally? How would you like to be mature and complete emotionally? Could use some of that in our country today. How about mature and complete spiritually? Even physically. All of that sounds wonderful. And God says, if you want to be mature and complete, you're going to have to go through tests. And they're often going to follow those highs. There's a saying in locker rooms all across America, hero to zero. It's something that happens. So a player will let's say they're playing basketball, and somebody makes a dive. This player makes a dive and he steals the ball. He makes a great steal. And so then he takes the ball, and instead of dishing it to the point guard and letting him set up the offense, he just goes for the basket. And then he ends up turning the ball over. He went from hero to zero. And again, this failure thing, and Abram's doing the same thing. He's going to go from hero to zero. Well, how's he going to get back on track? So let's read the story, and then you'll see where this is coming from. Now, there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to live there for a while because the famine was severe. Okay? Imagine every grocery store in town, the shelves are completely empty of anything edible. The restaurants are all closed because there's nothing in their pantries. Your house there's not a crumb in your house or your neighbor's house because there's no food, because there's no ability to grow anything. That's famine. Famine means there's no food and there's no ability to make food like there used to be. And it's usually because of a drought or a pestilence of some kind. And they lived at a time when they didn't have freezers and refrigerators. They didn't have the ability to create food from things that are questionable ingredients, that maybe we don't even know how to say the word ingredients. They just had to grow it. And they had to grow it because some of it you could eat, vegetables and fruit, and then some of it was food for the animals that you would eat. And so this is crisis. Now, a famine doesn't sneak up on you. It's not like a tornado. It's like you have no time to prepare. It's more like a hurricane. You know, we have hurricanes here in Charleston, but we usually can see them coming because the news makes a big deal. And so we have some time to prepare and even leave town if we really feel. And a famine's more like a hurricane in that regard. So this isn't like Abraham doesn't have time to think and pray. He has time to process. And he's a smart, shrewd individual. He's very successful businessman. Okay, he's done everything, you know, in a way that has made him very wealthy. Okay, he's married. Now, he doesn't have any kids yet. This is part of the story, right, is that he and his wife have been married. He's 75, she's 65. They have no kids. And yet God has promised him, you're going to be, right, you're going to be, I'm going to make you a great nation. I'm going to make your name great. All the peoples are going to be blessed through you. For that to be possible, he needs descendants. Okay? So that's still in the back of his mind. There's famine, what we don't see him do here is ask the Lord what to do. Okay? So this is another truth, right? Not only does testing tend to follow triumph, but testing tends to cause us to run away from God. Okay? I was youth pastor at a church in Wilson, North Carolina, just south of Rocky Mount on I-95. And it was at a major crossroads. That's the reason Wilson was a big town. And it was a big tobacco town, too. So you had I-95 and you had 264, US 264, which takes you to the Outer Banks. So it was a crossroads, and travelers were always stopping. And and our church was pretty close to the interstate. And it was a sizable enough church to where there was a staff there throughout the week, and you could just come in. And so a lot of times people would come, that were traveling from New York to Florida or Florida to New York, because it was always one direction or the other, they'd stop in and ask for money for gas. And when you would sit down with them and hear their story, inevitably they were running from something because they thought, well, if we're decided, since this was a big problem, we were going to go to Florida. And then usually you'd catch them on the way back if you gave them money, and they're like, yeah, we decided to go back. It's like, you can't outrun your problems, generally speaking. And I'm not suggesting that never works, but our tendency is to run when testing comes. But God is great. That's another truth you can write down. God is great. Therefore, we don't have to be in control because he is able. And we're going to see that play out in verse 17. So he goes down, so he doesn't consult God. He just decides, which was common sense, common thinking in that day. If you didn't have food, you went to Egypt. Now, here's why. So you've got Israel, and you've got the Mediterranean Sea. Okay, I'm doing the mirror image for your benefit. Okay, so Mediterranean Sea, Israel, okay, and then Africa's down here and Egypt's here, all right? And then if you go this way, you've got desert, and then you've got the Tigris, Euphrates, Mesopotamia, Iran, Iraq area, okay? So there's nowhere that's going to have any good food because of there's not a lot of major rivers here. So they go to Egypt because the Nile River, it never dries up. It floods regularly in a good way, like floods to help agriculture, like natural irrigation. So Egypt grew up to be a very prosperous region of the world, maybe the most wealthiest. It's where the pyramids were, right? You have this pharaoh, it's just an Egyptian king, food, drink, and so people would go. And so he goes. He says he's going. But he also knows what Egyptians are like. He knows this isn't going to be good for me. So he went down to Egypt to live there for a while because the famine was severe. As he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife, Sarai, I know what a beautiful woman you are. Now, it's not date night, okay? This isn't that kind of, I know what a beautiful woman you are, right? This is, I'm setting you up for an ask. When the Egyptians see, well, he's not setting her up, he's actually stating a fact that's making this what he thinks necessary. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife, and then they will kill me, but will let you live. Which is actually what typically happened. He knew this. Say you are my sister so that I will be treated well for your sake and my life will be spared because of you. And I often wondered, well, why would that be any different? But if you showed up and so women were treated like property back then, okay? And so when you would arrange a marriage and basically the the groom's father would pay money as a dowry to get her to be his son's wife. This is kind of the way it would work. So I'm trying to make sure I got this right. This is his wife. Then they will kill me. Okay, so he says, I want you to pretend to be my sister. Now, this is going to sound weird, but she actually is his half-sister. Okay, and I know that makes us cringe, but back then it wasn't a problem. Today it's a problem. I don't recommend that at all. But back then, okay, so same dad, different moms. They married, but no kids. And so he is thinking, well, it's half true, but a half-truth is still a lie. It's still deceiving. And this is the problem. He doesn't go to the Lord and ask the Lord to help him, okay? He just does what he thinks is right, okay? And because he's her brother and her father's not in the picture, because he's since died, he gets to be in the role of dad. So he gets to negotiate the spoils for her, okay? Now, I'm still thinking, this doesn't sound like a solution, okay? So one suggestion that I read was, probably he had a way of saying, let's go through the motions, we'll do all of this, and then we'll leave, we'll escape before things go too far. Okay, because remember, God has made a promise to him and to them. That includes her, and that includes them having a descendant, an heir, so that all those promises could be fulfilled. But if she's sleeping with Pharaoh, that's not going to work. That's going to kill it. And so this is where you find the truth that God keeps his promises. Okay? He is going to make sure no one derails his providential will. And so, as a result, this is how it plays out. And so it doesn't say what she said. I assume she went along with it. I'm sure she wasn't happy about it, and it's only going to get worse. Watch this. So say you're my sister so that I'll be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you. You hear the focus on himself, it sounds to me like. When Abram came to Egypt, the Egyptians saw that Sarai was a very beautiful woman. Again, 65 years old, oil of delay all over her, right? And when Pharaoh's officials saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and she was taken into his palace, or taken to be his wife, okay? And there's some debate as to whether or not she actually slept with Pharaoh. I don't think she did. One, because I think it could have nullified the promise. I don't know that it would have. But two, if you even use the story of Esther as an example, Egyptians and Jews did not mix, okay? They didn't even eat at the same table. And I'm not talking about because the Jews wouldn't eat with them, but because they wouldn't eat with Jews. It was like both ways. And so there was a preparation to change the woman's appearance and the oils that she would wear and the cosmetics she would use so that she would not only look more Egyptian, but she would smell the right way, and that all of these things would be, that she would be prepared for Pharaoh because he was king. Okay? And so I don't think that's enough time. I don't think there's been enough time for any of that. She's part of a harem. There's plenty of other women there. He can wait. Okay? And I think that's what happens. I think before things get out of control, God steps in. All right, so verse 16 says, he treated Abram well for her sake, and Abram acquired sheep and cattle, male and female donkeys, male and female servants, and camels. Okay? Now, that doesn't sound impressive to us today, right? I mean, nobody is accumulating, not many of you, if any of you, are accumulating cattle and so forth. So let me put it in a little different terms. Transportation was rare back then. You walked everywhere. Okay? They've already walked the 600 miles from Haran to where they were in Canaan, most of them walked, but now they've walked from Israel to Egypt, which is probably not that far, maybe only 200 miles, okay? So if you got to ride a donkey, all right, that was like a BMW for them in that day, okay? So male and female donkeys, plural, means you've got a fleet of cars, okay? But then there's also camels. And there's even debate whether camels were even domesticated yet, but apparently there were some domesticated enough to throw in, but they weren't just a throw in. They were like so rare, but think about it. They were very fast, very strong, could carry a lot of cargo, and they could go across the desert on very little water. So you could say fuel efficient, I guess. They were like Ferraris in value. And he got multiple camels. So this is going to play, and you'll see this next week, this is going to actually hurt and make things worse for Abram and his nephew Lot when they go back after the famine. But we'll keep moving. So this is where the Lord, so he's in a ditch, But there's a tendency to go, well, is he really? Look, he's pulling out some serious spoils here. He's going to do all right. Okay, but he's still married to Sarai, and she's still in the harem. Okay, she is not a happy camper. And so this is what happens. But the Lord inflicted, I'm in verse 17. But the Lord inflicted serious diseases on Pharaoh and his household because of Abram's wife, Sarai. How did they figure out it was because of her? Well, it says, the Lord inflicted serious diseases on Pharaoh and his household. Now, you could argue she's part of his household, but she's really not. And the Lord is making that very clear right now, because she's probably the only one without being covered in boils or whatever the disease was that was obvious on everybody except her. And so I'm guessing the eunuch in charge, because every harem has at least one eunuch, would ask, who are you really? And she had to come clean and say, I'm his wife. At this point, Pharaoh is hot. He is really upset. And so one of the most powerful men in the world is very angry with you. This is what happens. So Pharaoh summoned Abram. What have you done to me? Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, so that I took her to be my wife? Because Abram had deceived him. It's his fault. Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go. And then Pharaoh gave orders about Abram to his men, and they sent him on his way with his wife and everything he had. He was like, now, why not kill him? Why didn't he kill Abram? Why didn't he take all his stuff back? I think he's like, whoever is behind this Abram dude is powerful. This God is powerful. Just get out of here. I'm like, and so he sends him away. Okay. He bails Abram out. He pulls him out of the ditch. Okay. Now, Abram's not right with God yet. Okay. But God in his mercy has begun the process of making it possible for Abram to get out of the ditch. Okay. But the first thing he did was he protected and kept his promise. Now, you're going to see here in the next few, we're going to finish these last 4 verses, that redemption leads to new beginnings. And this was the beginning. God always initiates redemption. He's always the one that reaches out to us first. When we're in the ditch, we can't get ourselves out spiritually. We need help. Sometimes he does that through a friend, and sometimes he does it through a Pharaoh, and like he did here. Verse 1 of 13. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev, with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. Abram had become very wealthy in livestock and in silver and gold. From the Negev, he went from place to place until he came to Bethel, to the place where Bethel and where his tent had been earlier, and where he had first built an altar, Ebenezer. Okay, there Abram called on the name of the Lord. That's key. So he goes back to the place where he was with the Lord last, which is where he built this altar. And this altar is basically a pile of rocks built there, put there to remember, like Lance said. And so that's what an Ebenezer is. And he goes back there and he worships the Lord. Okay, he might have offered sacrifices. It doesn't say he did that, but it wasn't uncommon for them to offer burnt offerings and peace offerings to God. Okay, and it was kind of the pre-book, all the laws of all the sacrifices. But the pile of rocks also was significant because it signified this is the Lord's land. Canaan is the Lord's. And it was a way for Abram to be a witness. So he obeyed God, he worshiped God, and he witnessed to God. This was the way, and altars were the key excuse or object lesson to make that happen. And so he calls on the name of the Lord. So this is where he repents. This is where Abram comes back to God and acknowledges, I didn't do that well at all. I sinned against you. I put the promise in jeopardy. I got in the ditch. Thank you for pulling me out. Okay? Maybe you can relate. I know I can. Many a time I've been in the ditch and I've needed somebody to pull me out. And sometimes God uses a friend to help pull me out. Sometimes it's an enemy. Sometimes he just does it. But what do you do when you fail God? You go back to the last place and time where you were with him. and you start over. You repent and you believe, and that leads to a new beginning. And the Christian life is a series of new beginnings. And we need to be okay with that. Don't let your pride keep you from going back because you're like, well, I keep doing it over and over. Okay, and so not doing it over is good. Why? That's pride. Humble yourself and go back again. That's what he's calling us to do. So we'll pick it up here next time, but that's what I want you to remember that. So let's pray.